Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and welcome to Bryant Research's first ever webinar on the rise of plant-based nutrition in pet food. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. We really do have a fantastic webinar planned for you all. We have three fantastic speakers and a wonderful guest hostess today as well. We'll be hearing from Professor Andrew Knight, who's a world-leading expert on pet nutrition, on the evidence for plant-based pet diets. We'll also be hearing from Bryant Research's very own Billy Nicholles, a rising star in vegan pet food, on his consumer survey for plant-based pet food in the UK. And we'll be hearing from Rory Cockshaw, Founders Associate at Omnipetfoods, about how their company is helping to revolutionize pet food. But first, let me hand you over to our wonderful host for today and journalist, Stef Bottinelli.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Before we start with Professor Andrew Knight, we're going to run a quick poll, which you can take part in. And let me start with the first question. So what is your background or affiliation? And you can vote in this. So you can get voting and then we can start seeing your answers as you vote. Okay, so we have a few people in the pet industry, NGO and advocacy as well. But quite a few people from not in the food industry. It's very interesting. We do have also a few people, about 6% in the food industry. Have you ever fed your pet a plant-based diet? You can vote for this next question now. We have a large amount of you who are currently feeding your pets a plant-based diet. About 20% who would like to. And the next question, which aspect of plant-based pet food would motivate you the most? Environmental impact, health benefits for pets, or farmed animal welfare? So farmed animal welfare, it's about 83% of you would do it for that reason, and 14% for the health benefits for pets. Nobody for environmental impact so far. Nope, we have 8% sorry, for environmental impact, but farmed animal welfare is seems to be the most voted reason why you would choose to adopt a plant-based diet for your pet. Fantastic. So we have farmed animal welfare, 85%, health benefits for pets, now at 13%, and environmental impact at 6%. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your answers. That's great. And now let me introduce our first speaker, is Professor of Animal Welfare, Andrew Knight. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you to the organisers of this event. So I've been asked to talk and summarise the recent research that's been going on in the field of vegan pet food. The idea that dogs and cats could possibly be maintained on vegan diets seems outrageous to many people. We often think of them as being carnivores. Actually, they're not quite carnivores, or at least not dogs. Dogs evolved from wolves some 20 to 40,000 years ago, when they followed our hunter-gatherer ancestors across the landscape as our ancestors hunted large game animals, but subsisted primarily on starchy root vegetables, actually, as well as berries and nuts and so on. The wolves who were a bit more confident and less timid would approach more closely to the human campfires and sometimes receive food scraps. And those with better temperaments and collaborative personalities started to cooperate more closely with our ancestors as they traveled the landscape hunting and gathering. And over time, the wolf hybrids who had genetic mutations that enabled them to derive some nutritional benefit from human food scraps did better than the wolves that didn't have those mutations. And over 20 to 40,000 years, they co-evolved with us to become modern domesticated dogs who are biologically omnivorous, not carnivorous anymore. They've got the ability to derive nutritional benefit from quite a mixed diet, actually, similar to those of human food scraps. Cats have had a different role. Cats are still very much biologically carnivorous. They haven't evolved with humans for as long. It's been around about 8 to 10,000 years, and their role has been primarily to guard our human food stores, particularly grain stores, from rodents. So they've been still hunting rodents and have not been subsisting on scraps from cooked root vegetables as dogs have. None of this is very relevant to modern domesticated dogs and cats, both of whom survive on a diet typically consisting of body parts from animals such as cows, pigs, fish, that they would never naturally consume, along with all sorts of unnatural additives and packaged into dry kibble or tinned formulations and fed at predictable times daily. In contrast, the natural feeding regime of an ancestral cat might have been, or indeed a cat in the wild, might be to hunt and kill a variety of small mammals, birds, and large insects, and then to gorge as much as possible whenever a kill is made to prevent consumption by competitors. And after this occurs, it'll be followed by an uncertain period of hunger. So actually, the diets of modern dogs and cats are far removed from those of ancestral or free-living dogs or cats. Today, many people are increasingly considering plant-based lifestyles for themselves and also for their dogs and cats for these sorts of reasons. People and dogs and cats are living longer, and there's more concern about health and well-being. People are also wanting better standards of diets for their dogs and cats, along with better standards of healthcare in general. There's increasing concern about the environmental impacts of the livestock sector. We know that about 2/3 of the Earth's ice-free land surface is given over to food production, and about 80% of that is used to graze livestock animals, or raise them in farms, or grow feed crops to feed to livestock animals. This 80% of all agricultural land produces about 18% of the calories and 37% of the protein that we consume. So it's a very inefficient way of producing food, and it does consume enormous amounts of land and fresh water and so on. And I'll talk more about that later. The human population of the Earth is just over 8 billion. In contrast, we slaughter around about 80 billion land vertebrate animals each year, which is 10 times the human population of the Earth for food, and around about 1 to 3 trillion fish and marine animals. So the animals that are farmed, about 90% of those are intensively farmed, which is about 3/4 of all land animals and nearly all farmed fish. These animals are maintained in environments that are very crowded, at high stocking densities, relatively barren, with minimal environmental enrichment and opportunity for the animals to fulfill highly motivated behavioural urges. This is chronically stressful to these animals, and then nearly all of them are then killed at a very premature stage of life once they reach marketable body weight. So doing this to such vast numbers of animals is, of course, a major animal welfare and ethical concern. And finally, there's even the food justice issue. We know that more than 820 million people in the world suffer from hunger and malnutrition. That's about 1 in every 9 people on the planet. And that's driven by a grossly inequitable distribution of grain consumption around the world, varying from around about 26 kilograms per person per year in developing nations, up to 29 kilograms per person per year, up to more than 96 in wealthy nations, so more than 3 times as much grain. That's because in wealthy nations, most of the grain isn't being consumed directly, it's being consumed indirectly in the form of livestock produce. However, most of the grain fed to the livestock animals doesn't directly produce muscles, milk and eggs. It goes to supporting the bodily maintenance processes of livestock animals. So it's a very inefficient use of grain, but overall it drives up the consumption of grain globally, meaning that the poorest people miss out. It has been calculated previously that we already produce enough grain to feed double the human population of the earth. But if we were to all consume the livestock-rich diets of the wealthiest 20 nations, we would need 7 planets to be able to supply all the grain that's necessary. So there's actually a major food justice issue associated with the overconsumption of livestock produce, particularly in wealthy nations. So for all these sorts of reasons, and I call some of these mega trends, particularly concerned about the environment, people are increasingly looking at alternative diets. They're not just plant-based diets. Emerging pet food alternatives include all of these. And the best developed of the plant-based ones are certainly the vegan diets. The vegan diets are growing very rapidly. They've already been valued. Just vegan dog food alone is being worth about $14 billion globally, and that's expected to almost double over the next decade. As you can see, the growth is not uniform around the world. India, the world's most populous nation, has a strong tradition of vegetarianism, and growth there is expected to be much quicker than the global average. To ascertain how many consumers would realistically be interested in feeding alternatives to conventional or raw meat-based diets, in 2020, we conducted the largest survey so far it was more than 4,000 dog and cat guardians, primarily based in the United Kingdom and Europe, but globally. 54% on the right would not be interested in choosing an alternative, but 46% would be. There was a similar, slightly smaller survey published the year before, focused on North America, and that found about 35% would be interested in alternatives. So we found 46%. As you can see, the most popular alternatives would have been laboratory-grown meat, followed by vegetarian and vegan diets. And as I said, the vegetarian and vegan alternatives are by far the most developed in this area. We asked what the characteristics of the alternatives would need to be before consumers would realistically choose to purchase them. And there were a long list of them that roughly matched those of other surveys. But the top 5 in order were these. People wanted to be reassured that there would be good health outcomes for their dogs and cats, that the diets would be nutritionally sound and of good quality, that they would be adequately palatable, so the dogs and cats would not suffer from consuming them, and that they would be environmentally sustainable. So interestingly, cost didn't feature in the top 5. It came in as number 6 on our survey. So my research since that survey in 2020 has been focused on targeting each of these top areas of concern to consumers. With respect to pet health, we conducted a study of health outcomes of more than 2,500 dogs maintained on these 3 main diet groups for at least a year, which is the largest survey of its kind so far. We determined how many times these dogs had needed to see vets within the last year, because if they had visited vets an unusually high number of times, that might have indicated that dogs were unwell, whether they needed any kind of medication or not, whether after initially being on a vegan diet or some other diet kind, they needed to progress onto a medical diet. If they had been seen by a veterinarian recently, we asked what was the assessment of the vet about the health of the animal, what was the owner's personal opinion about the health of the animal, what percentage of these animals was unwell, and if they were unwell, did they suffer from just one disorder or was it more than one? What was the average number of disorders per unwell animal? We also looked at the prevalence of the 22 most common health disorders in dogs in these different diet groups. The percentage of dogs that were unwell, you can see those fed conventional meat was about 49%, those fed raw meat 43%, and those fed vegan diets 36%. And for the average number of cases of illness per unwell dog, for those fed conventional meat, it's 1.65, raw meat and vegan was around about 1.5. The 22 most common health disorders You can see the top ones, there were gastrointestinal problems followed by skin coat and musculoskeletal and so on. The probabilities of suffering from one of these disorders was highest when dogs were fed conventional meat diets for 11 out of 22, that's half of them. Highest when dogs were fed raw meat-based diets for 8 out of 22. And highest when dogs were fed vegan diets for 3 out of 22 of these disorders. So on the basis of that, we concluded that the healthiest diets with the fewest dietary hazards were nutritionally sound vegan diets. I also mentioned the word hazards there, and I suppose that relates to a couple of well-known problems with raw meat-based diets. One is nutritional hazards, and the other is pathogens. So the nutritional hazards tend to be dietary deficiencies such as of vitamins, and minerals, and also imbalances. The pathogen hazards tend to be things like bacterial pathogens in particular. There are quite a body of studies, not just one or two, but quite a significant number, showing that dogs fed raw meat have higher rates of infection, essentially, with bacteria such as Salmonella, E. coli, and a range of other pathogenic bacteria. And unfortunately, it's not just the dogs, it's also the people that share households with those dogs. So they're either acquiring them from the raw meat or from the dogs. So certainly as I say, the least to most healthy with the fewest hazards are nutritionally sound vegan diets. We published that study in 2022 in one of the leading open access scientific journals globally, and it's been reported in more than 400 news outlets, including New Scientist. Since then, there have been a slew of other studies in this area, and this was the next one that came out, and this was also extremely significant. This has been produced by Dr. Sarah Dog, who's a veterinary nutritional specialist, and like me, has completed a PhD on vegan pet food. So she has a research team at Guelph Veterinary School in Canada, one of the leading veterinary schools in Canada. And they've been publishing a series of studies. And in this particular study, they looked at nearly 1,200 dogs, including about 360 fed solely vegan diets, fed these diets for 3 years on average. The vegan dogs were more likely to be in very good health and less likely to suffer from gastrointestinal and liver disorders. That's the same two disorders that they found in vegan cats, by the way. They did a similar study in vegan cats. And also less likely to suffer from ocular disorders, which was not found in the cats. Now, this is the most exciting result, I think, to come out of any of these studies so far. They studied how long the previously owned dogs had lived. And they found that the vegan dogs were living 1.5 years longer, actually, average lifespan of 14.1 years compared to 12.6 years. And you can see the lifespan curve on the right-hand side indicated in green compared to meat-based or a mixed diet. So like the other differences that I just mentioned, this was a statistically significant result. What does this mean to put this into human terms? In veterinary practice, we sometimes use a rule of thumb that 1 year of a dog life is equivalent to about 7 years of a human life. So 1.5 years would be about an extra decade of life at the end of somebody's lifespan. And it means that these dogs aren't just living longer. We also seem to be seeing that they're living better quality of lives as well, because across all of the studies, there are certain healthcare benefits that seem to be coming up consistently across more than one study. And they fall into two groups. One relates to lack of exposure to animal-sourced allergens in the diet. So that manifests as lower rates of itchy skin, ear canal problems. These cause discomfort in dogs. The second cluster of healthcare benefits seem to be a reduction in being overweight and obese, and associated disorders such as mobility problems and musculoskeletal disorders. So as I say, these dogs are not just living longer, they also seem to be living better quality of lives. So that's really significant just for these dogs themselves, not even considering impacts on food, animals, or the environment. Overall, I have only got 30 minutes or so to summarise all this, so I won't go into all of these, but there are now 10 studies or veterinary student master's theses that have examined health outcomes in dogs on vegetarian and vegan diets. If you click on my website, sustainablepetfood.info under health, you'll get a page like this where there is a short summary of each study and a click through to the full study results, all of which are either open access or can be downloaded from the links. 9 now support the use of these diets, and in fact it's clear that the weight of evidence overwhelmingly supports the use of nutritionally sound vegan dog food. What about cats? We published a similar study looking at health outcomes in more than 1,300 cats, and this is the largest study that's been published in cats so far. This time we also controlled for differences between the dietary groups in age, sex, neutering status, and also the location of the cats, whether cats might have been going outdoors and hunting, for example. So we controlled for those factors. After doing that, we looked at the same 7 general indicators of illness, and you can see those across the bottom, the x-axis. Increased numbers of veterinary visits, medication use, therapeutic diets, and so on. The dashed horizontal line shows the relative odds of these outcomes occurring for cats fed meat, and the blue dots show the reduction in odds when cats were fed vegan diets. The lines above the dots, above and below, indicate the 95% confidence intervals, and as you can see, they cross the dashed horizontal lines. So none of these individual results was statistically significant. Now, there wasn't a significant difference between cats fed the meat-based diets, but collectively they constitute quite a strong trend. We went further and looked at cats with average characteristics, so average age, sex, neutering status, and location, and we worked out the probabilities of these indicators of illness occurring for cats fed meat, and that's in the first column there. Cats fed vegan diets in the second column, and then the reduction of risk of these indicators of illness for cats fed vegan diets, that's in the third column. As you can see, the reductions in risk varied from about 4% up to about 55%. We looked at the 22, we looked at occurrences of illness, first of all. So for cats fed meat, 42% of these cats overall were suffering from at least one kind of illness. 37% of cats fed vegan diets were doing likewise. And on average, cats fed meat based diets had 1.6 cases of illness per cat, and the unwell vegan cats had 1.3 cases of health disorder per cat. The 22 most common health disorders in cats were slightly different from those in dogs. The top of the list for cats was dental and oral disorders, body weight disorders, and gastrointestinal disorders. These disorders were most likely in cats fed meat-based diets for 15 out of 22, that's 2/3 of them. And they were most likely in cats fed vegan diets for 7 out of 22, that's 1/3 of them. So based on all of these results, we again concluded that the healthiest diet with the fewest nutritional hazards would be nutritionally sound vegan diets. And we published that as well, also in PLOS One, that was last year. Looking at cats overall, there are now 3 studies similar to those in dogs, which have examined health outcomes in cats maintained on vegetarian and vegan diets. On my website, sustainablepetfood.info, under the health tab, there's another page just for cats, which looks similar. Again, there's a summary paragraph, key results, and a click through to the full study. All 3 support the use of these diets, and so once again, it's clear that the weight of evidence supports the use of nutritionally sound vegan cat food. So this body of studies, most of which has just been published in the last 3 years, collectively satisfies, I think, the top concern that the surveyed pet guardians said that they had before they'd realistically choose one of these alternative diets. The next most important concern people said that they had was to be reassured that the vegan pet foods would be nutritionally sound and of good quality. And I only have one slide on this. We conducted another survey. We surveyed manufacturers to see if there were any systemic differences in steps taken to ensure nutritional soundness and quality between 19 manufacturers producing meat-based pet foods and 10 producing vegan, almost vegan or vegetarian pet foods. This was a very thorough study. We looked at every step virtually from initial formulation of a diet through manufacturing to storage and shipping. So we started off by asking whether companies were working with veterinary nutritional specialists, PhD nutritionists, or using in-house expertise. What level of expertise were they using when formulating their diets? How did they seek to ensure that they were nutritionally sound? Were they formulating them to meet the nutritional guidelines of US or European authorities? Were they conducting feeding trials, which is when you maintain animals on a test diet as their sole nutrient intake for 6 months, usually in a laboratory, and then study the animals at the end of the 6 months? How did they ensure the quality of the ingredients? Were they going out to ingredient manufacturing plants and inspecting them? Were they relying upon paper agreements alone? Were they supplementing appropriately to ensure that the diets included all of the necessary nutrients? Because both meat-based and vegan diets do require supplementation. People often ask about taurine, which is a nutrient that is required in the diets of cats, and without which they will suffer from cardiac, visual disorders and birth defects. Taurine is supplied in meat, but what people often don't know is that the naturally occurring taurine within meat is heavily degraded, loses most of its biological activity through the temperatures and pressures and chemical treatments of processing of pet food. And after the processing of meat-based pet food, taurine needs to be supplemented and a synthetic source of taurine is used. The same synthetic source of taurine is used in vegan pet foods as well. The same applies to many other nutrients that are fragile and will be degraded by processing. So both meat-based and vegan diets do need to be supplemented to ensure that they're nutritionally sound. So we asked whether companies were supplementing appropriately, what supplements were they supplying, what preservation methods were they using, heat, cold, other methods to ensure the nutritional soundness of the diets over time. Were they adding antimicrobials, antifungals, along with flavorants and colorants and so on? Were they monitoring for the degradation of nutrient levels over time? And were they over-supplementing with nutrients to take account for the natural loss of nutrient activity over time during storage of diets? Were they supplying appropriate protocols to their retailers and ultimately end-stage consumers for storage and shipping to try to safeguard the nutritional soundness and quality of the diets? So once we had completed this survey and looked at the differences, we found that most companies seem to be doing things fairly well at most stages. Overall, those producing the plant-based diets had a slight advantage. And we felt this might have been because these diets are newer and more controversial, and these companies might have been going the extra mile to try to ensure that their products were nutritionally sound. The fourth concern that our surveyed guardians said they had was palatability. Would the animals be happy eating vegan diets? It's sometimes claimed that forcing dogs or cats to eat vegan pet food is cruel because it's unnatural. In order to address this point, Jed Gillen, in his book Obligate Carnivore, makes a wonderful point. He says, I'm going to read this out. He says, try this experiment. Skip your cat's breakfast one morning and bring him or her to the beach instead. Driven by hunger, what natural instincts might kick in? What are the chances that your cat will splash into the water, swim 50 or so miles out into the deep ocean, and thereby engage a 1,200-pound animal, because an adult tuna can be as large as a horse, in an underwater battle to the death in order to fulfill the natural feline diet of fish? The idea that fish is a natural food for cats is absurd. They are descended from desert creatures and are notoriously hydrophobic. Have you ever given your cat a bath? So he's making the point that cats certainly have the ability to enjoy ingredients which are entirely unnatural to them. Nevertheless, despite this, some doggedly maintain that it's cruel to feed cats diets based on unnatural ingredients. I think more productive than people arguing back and forth amongst themselves is to actually go and ask the animals what they think about these diets. And how we do that, of course, is by studying their behaviour at feeding time. So we studied the behaviour of more than 2,300 dogs on these three main diets. And we looked through the previously published scientific literature and identified every indicator of palatability, how much the pets enjoy their food, that's ever been identified for dogs. And these are things such as wolfing the food down quickly, rushing up to the food bowl quickly, wagging tails, sniffing food, jumping, barking, and so on. For cats, we studied more than 1,100 cats on these three main diets that you can see here. These are both the biggest studies of their kind in these fields. There have been a number of others previously that had consistent results. There were 15 indicators of palatability for cats. You can see a lot of licking of lips and noses and flicking of ears and tails and so on in cats. The first thing we did was we actually looked at the degree to which these behaviours were likely to be displayed or unlikely to be displayed when fed these different diets, and then which of these behaviours co-varied consistently with one another. We analysed that statistically, and we were able to identify some as being positive indicators and some as being negative indicators of palatability. And then we looked to see how much these varied between the three different dietary groups. Once we'd done that, the overall conclusions were, as you can see on this slide, for dogs, there was no consistent evidence of any difference between vegan diets and the meat-based diets. For cats, there was almost no difference. There were in a couple of behaviours. Cats on the vegan diets tended to lick their food less often, and that's a plus for the vegan diets. Cats on the conventional diets were leaving more food. That's a minus for the conventional diets. But looking at all 15 behaviours overall, there was virtually no difference. So we concluded, as you can see, the results from our study, which concurred with the other much smaller studies in the field, don't support the views that vegan pet food might have reduced palatability and thus compromise the welfare of dogs or cats, providing, of course, that the diets are nutritionally sound. And the final concern was environmental sustainability. And I think this is where it gets even more exciting. We know that the food system overall contributes about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions, according to a study by Zhu and colleagues in Nature Food in 2020. The livestock sector contributes about 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there was another study that calculated that the pet food sector in the United States is responsible for 25 to 30% of all of the emissions of the livestock sector, all of the environmental impacts, in fact. If we take the lower end of that range, just 25%, and apply that to all emissions from the livestock sector, that's 20%, then it would indicate that about 5% of all greenhouse gas emissions are due to the pet food sector. That's pretty staggering when you consider that it's previously been calculated that 13.5% of all emissions are due to the transport sector. So all of the trucks, cars, planes in the world combined, perhaps responsible for 13.5%, and have armies of people working to develop more sustainable transport solutions. And we have something that could be responsible for 5% here. And the only armies of people we seem to have is people like Rory, who'll be speaking after myself and Dodd and her research team occasionally doing bits and pieces. Occasional other researchers, Billy will be doing his own survey, and he'll tell you about that shortly. And that's it, worldwide. So I think this has got to be one of the most neglected, potentially impactful areas for addressing greenhouse gas emissions and environmental sustainability. I wanted to calculate in my most recent study what would happen if the world's dogs and cats were transitioned onto nutritionally sound vegan diets. How many additional people could we feed using food energy savings, because it's very inefficient to produce livestock products? how many food animals would no longer need to be slaughtered each year, and what would the environmental benefits be? It wasn't possible to do a study like this thoroughly until very recently, but in 2020, a detailed analysis of all the ingredients used in pet food in the US appeared that actually covered 2/3 of the entire US pet food market, providing details of species of food animals, tonnages, and all the ingredients. So I analysed that. I looked at the energy needs of dogs and cats, and also for comparison people as well in the US in the same year, 2020. I wanted to also compare globally. The most recent year with reliable populations for dogs and cats was 2018. So I used 2018 for globally. And I used previously published data indicating the environmental impacts of all of these different ingredients. And I was able to compare plant-based versus meat-based or omnivorous diets. Having done all that, I found that within the US, where there's relatively high pet ownership, dogs and cats seem to be responsible for consuming at least 20% of all livestock, and hence 20% of the environmental footprint of the livestock sector. Globally, pet ownership is a little bit lower than a wealthy nation such as the US or indeed the United Kingdom. Dogs and cats would consume about 9% of all livestock. This is indicated in an infographic that I prepared to summarise the key results of this study. Globally in 2018, the year I was studying, there were about 78 billion land animals being killed for food each year. It's now more than 80 billion. You can see the numbers of different species that are being consumed by dogs and cats. You can see from this infographic that nutritionally sound vegan diets, if implemented for all dogs, would spare about 6 billion land animals from slaughter, and cats about 0.9 billion. These are only the owned cats and dogs. They don't account for colony-fed cats, free-roaming cats, dogs, strays, and so on. And by the way, it's been estimated that when you add those numbers, the number is approximately double. Greenhouse gas emissions that would be freed up if all the cats in the world, just the owned cats, were transitioned onto nutritionally sound vegan diets. You'd spare more greenhouse gas emissions than produced by New Zealand, which is a small country but has one of the world's largest dairy industries, so it's quite a high greenhouse gas footprint. If dogs transition, you'd spare more greenhouse gases than produced by the entire United Kingdom. And if humans transitioned, more greenhouse gases than produced by the whole of the EU. The land saved, just looking at human diets, would you'd free up land larger than Russia, which is the world's biggest country, combined with India. For freshwater, there'll be vast savings of freshwater as well. And you could feed millions of additional people. If the cats transition, you'd free up enough food energy to feed the entire human population of the United Kingdom and a bit more. Dogs, the entire population of the European Union, and humans, at least 2/3 of the current population of the Earth. And all of these estimates are quite conservative. So that study was also very recently published in PLOS One. And if you go to the study and click on comments, you'll find the infographic that I just went through, which summarises what is a very long and detailed study. We also, by the way, just published a systematic review looking at all solutions to climate change published in the last 20 years in scientific literature, which also identifies that the food system needs to be a major area of focus, a transition away from livestock farming toward plant-based diets. So, as I said, those are the top 5 concerns that our surveyed guardians said that they had before they would realistically be willing to choose vegan diets. The valuations of the pet food market, vegan pet food market, showing a very strong increase, must be considered, bearing in mind that most of the pet food consumers and companies don't yet know about the research findings satisfying the top concerns of our survey guardians, because most of this research has been published within the last 3 months for some of the studies I just mentioned, or certainly within the last 3 years. So it hasn't been time yet for this information to trickle out, which is why webinars such as this is so important. And I'm grateful to Bryant Research for putting this on. In closing, I want to emphasize that it's really important that people don't try just producing their own vegan pet foods at home. It is really important to choose a nutritionally sound vegan diet that's hopefully been produced by a reputable company, working with veterinary nutritional experts, and can provide some kind of information about steps taken to ensure nutritional soundness. If a company hasn't got any information, won't answer inquiries, that's when you should be looking for another company. It can also be helpful to make dietary transitions gradually to enable a transition of digestive enzymes and bacterial populations in the gut. And advice about easing the transition is available on the summary article in my website, sustainablepetfood.info. I'm grateful to the co-authors of my various studies, most of who are statisticians, and to the organisations that have funded the research, including ProVeg International, some pet food companies. However, although they made the research possible, none of these funders had anything to do with the studies in any way, so had no influence whatsoever over the results or analysis. I don't have 4,000 friends on Facebook, and to reach that many pet guardians in my survey, I was assisted by a whole range of volunteers and some digital marketing companies, and I'm grateful to them as well. If anyone wants to look at those studies more closely, I do have them, as I said, on sustainablepetfood.info and also my own website for the ones that I've published. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. If you have any questions for Andrew or for any of our experts, we will be running a Q&A after the presentations. There's a Q&A function on your screen, and you can start typing the questions now, and we will run them later. And we have one more poll to go before our next expert. Great. What would be the biggest concerns around plant-based pet food? If you would like to start voting now, we will read them out, and then we will move on to our next presentation. Nutritional adequacy, sorry, I can't speak today. 66%. Price and affordability. Of course, it's still a nascent industry, so price can still be a little bit higher than standard pet food. And taste and enjoyment. So nutritional adequacy and price and affordability are the most clicked through answers, followed by taste and enjoyment. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we have our next presentation. With us today is Rory Cockshaw, Growth Manager at omnipetfood. Rory, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Hello. Is it me now? Is it Billy? I can't remember which way around it was.
Billy, it's you.
Me, brilliant. Cool. So can you... 1 second. See my screen. Cool. Is that good?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Nice. Yeah, as we said, my name's Rory and I'm from Omni Pet Food, and this is one dog food maker's story. Here's a little dog with a bowl of Omni food. You can see in the bottom we've got a little guy with a hat on. He's going to be the kind of loading bar as we go through the presentation, so you can see how far through we are. So a bit about me, my background. So I was a student a couple of years ago. Studied natural sciences, became a vegan over the course of doing that, partially for environmental, partially for ethical reasons. First job out of uni was I joined a vegan charity as a campaigner and worked there for a while. And then I joined Omni, I believe it was last year, first kind of just doing some sales and events, then became growth manager, and now I'm a founder's associate. So my role in Omni is kind of as broad as you like, do a lot of different things there. I live with my partner Izzy, who is still a vegan campaigner, and our dog Lily, who you can see in the bottom right, who is vegan but not a campaigner. She is on the floor asleep just next to me. She is fed on Omni dog food, and we'll come on to that a bit later on. So Omni's background, we were co-founded by two entrepreneurs. You can see them just down in the bottom right. Those are my bosses. So on the left, you have Dr. Guy Sandalowski. So he is a vet. He's worked in a number of different animal hospitals as a veterinary surgeon, and has been a dog lover for a lot of years. So he's got a dog who's about 15 years old now called Bondi. And we'll come a bit onto Bondi shortly. We've also got Shiv Sivakumar, who used to work at Deutsche Bank. He's a fundraising extraordinaire, knows all of the business ins and outs, how to get investments and build a business from the ground up. As does Dr. Guy. Of course, he's got an MBA as well. He's got a lot of post-nominals he does. So those are our founders, my bosses. And we founded Omni, and Omni's USPs, for those not familiar, USP is like a unique selling point. So it's what makes us special. Is we are the UK's first and still only vet-formulated, peer-reviewed, plant-based dog food brand, which is kind of a mouthful as far as a USP goes. Yeah, you can see kind of a graph on the right. Yeah, there I've curtailed it. But you can see we kind of position ourselves as being very much science-based. So we're really big on, as Andrew was just saying, we're really big on making sure that people know that we have good scientific credentials. We've worked with independent scientists who test our stuff. We've tested against what's called the FEDIAF guidelines. Now, FEDIAF is the kind of an organisation that sets the minimum requirements of different nutrients that dogs need in their diets. And we exceed on all of those guidelines. And so we can say we are nutritionally complete, and we're not just pulling your leg or selling you a marketing lie. We, as I say, we're founded by vets as well, so vet formulated. We don't just have Dr. Guy on the team, Guy Sandalowski. We've actually got 4, I think now 5 other vets as well, who work closely with our products, with product design, with testing things, with making sure it's kind of got a good scientific basis, drawing from all their opinions and expertise and training as well. And we work with independent experts who kind of help to create and test everything for us. Peer reviewed, if you go on our website, or I'll mention an ebook a little bit later on, you can read about this, about all the results of our peer reviewed trials on our food. Of course, when you say peer reviewed in terms of pet food, a lot of people think it's like animal experimentation, like laboratory testing. That's not what we do. We test with just people's pets in their own homes, consensually and kindly. We don't condone or support really animal testing, and plant-based as well. Plant-based, everything we make is fully vegan. There's no animal ingredients whatsoever. Although I'll come on to the difference between plant-based and novel proteins later on. You can see down there cultivated meat. So I can't say too much here, but this is another USP of Omni, is we are very much looking into this idea of cultivated meat. We saw in Andrew's presentation, there was a slide at the beginning which showed which of these non-traditional meat products would you be interested in trying, and about a quarter of people actually said cultivated or lab-grown meat, and it's about 15% for vegan and vegetarian each. So that is something we are heavily looking into. Here, as you can see on the slide, and also behind me, I've got the clever little background on. Here's the Omni range. So just to talk you through what we do food for adult dogs, for puppy dogs, for senior dogs. That's our normal kibble. We also do this sensitivity diet, which is you can see front and center in the foreground. That is our kind of hypoallergenic, very, very tasty diet. We do wet food of different kinds. So we do wet food toppers, which come either as like a beef or a chicken flavor. We do tins as well, similarly a chicken pot pie or a beef casserole, again fully vegan. We do a range of treats, or functional treats for different purposes, whether they've got anxiety or stomach issues or whatever else. And also we've just launched a range of 7 different supplements, which help, whether it's with expressing your dog's anal glands or again soothing their anxiety or whatever it might be. So that's our range, just as a bit of a background. Now, here's the really important thing, and this is kind of why I'm here. What do Omni's customers think? You can see, I believe, on the Trustpilot in front of you, they like it. So Omni has a very good customer basis. 91% of people have given us 5 stars. Our overall average is 4.9. Now on Trustpilot, for context, the average for a company is about 4.1 or 4.2, I believe it is. So that we're above average in terms of how people review us, and most of those are pretty good results. Now we've got one of our a couple of our customers here. So this, you can see holding a dog and stroking a sheep. That dog is Mr. Chester. So he is one of Omni's customers who I know very well. He's my mum's dog. We transitioned Chester onto Omni a few months ago now, and it became after. So my mum's a vegan as well, and she'd been trying for years to find a vegan dog food that Mr. Chester would like, and she tried a whole load of different foods, and he just kept leaving them in the bowl. And she was one of these vegans, as are so many. I can kind of tell from the chat poll results, a lot of people in the audience today might be vegan as well. She just couldn't find any food that he'd like, and so she finally found omnisensitivity diet after I started working here, after we'd launched it, and tried him on that, and he won't eat anything else. So he's a very keen doggo. We've got this one as well. So this is Nicholles. So this is my brother's dog. You can see I'm working my way through the family. Again, she is a rescue from Morocco. She arrived in November last year, and he put her onto an Omni diet, and she is absolutely loving it. And again, won't eat anything else. And here is Hector, who is my dad's dog. Hector is the one on the right who's yawning in front. So Hector, so my dad and my stepmom, they're a bit more kind of meat-based, and they're harder to convince that plant-based is a good idea. I brought some Omni food back for him to try, and he absolutely loves it. And so they're still kind of adamant that he should have some meat, despite my best protestations. But now they have to mix it with Omni because he loves Omni food as well. So clearly the customers are pretty pleased. Now, one of the themes that customers kind of give about Omni in their reviews. So number one is the scientific backing of Omni. And this is the most common thing that is a real conversation starter with people, whether I meet them in person or I'm chatting to them on the phone or via email. The scientific backing that Omni has, it gives people a lot of comfort in the brand. So knowing it's peer reviewed, knowing it's developed by vets, that is a really, really strong USP for Omni as a brand. So the scientific backing is super important. And just knowing that there are well-trained people out there who say, actually, yes, it is a good idea to feed dogs plant-based. Doggo experience, this is another very key aspect of who we are, what we do. So to this end, we make recipes that are very rich in things like herbs and spices. We never change our recipes either. So once we've got a recipe, we stick with it, because if you change it, you might add in allergens or things that dogs just don't like. And so the doggo experience is very reliable. You know exactly what you're getting. And so that's another really crucial aspect of what we do. Customer excellence as well. So this is less about the dog food and more about the experience of getting the dog food. Because we're a smallish startup, still we're in the scale-up phase, we can afford to really take our time with customer service. And so with our customers, often our trust pilots are almost entirely about the experience of buying from Omni. So the idea when we first started was to give all the customers who come to us the experience of basically like checking into a 5-star hotel. That's how we want them to feel, that kind of not quite snobbish and overbearing, but very much we're at your beck and call, we'll respond very quickly. When it's something like plant-based dog food, it's not just a gimmick or a trinket. With something like plant-based dog food, people are often unsure about it. And so the better you can make them feel, and the happier and the more sort of bought into the brand, the more they're like, actually, I'm not as nervous about trying this anymore. They're helpful. They know what they're talking about. They respond to me quickly. That's really useful for people who are trying something which is a bit more out there. Subscription reliability. So we've got subscribers anywhere from, say, central London right down to Tenerife. I had an email from a customer this morning who's just moved to Tenerife, and she was worried that she wouldn't be able to get Omni out there, because we serve to all of Western Europe now, pretty much all of Western Europe, and just expanding into Scandinavia as we speak. This woman was really pleased that she'd moved to Tenerife and she can still get bags of Omni food. So that's another really key aspect, is knowing where we are, knowing how to get us. For plant-based or novel protein dog food brands in general, customers are really bought into the idea because they care about the environment, about animals, about their dog's health, whatever it might be. And so they want to know that they can rely on you to always be there for them, which we do our best to be. And finally, veterinary support. I can't say that word either. So this, again, is a really, really crucial aspect of the brand. We've got, as I say, about 5 vets on the team, and we do, for our subscribers, we do free vet consultations, which obviously saves a lot of money, but also gives people a huge amount of kind of solidarity and knowing they're in the right place, talking to the right people. And often as well, vets aren't as educated, sadly, as, say, Professor Andrew Knight, on the reality and the benefits of plant-based dog food. And so this is a really important thing that we found, is having our vets at the beck and call of our customers, and they know that they can come to us. And we are, for that reason, expanding our vet ambassador program at the moment. So if there are any vets in the audience and you want to get in touch with us, please do. There's lots of ways that we'd love to work together. So it wouldn't be realistic if I didn't also mention the challenges that we face, and there are some. So being a plant-based or novel protein dog food brand does come with some difficulties. So number one is public receptivity. Surprisingly, not as bad as you'd think. So you do get lots of Facebook comments saying, oh, it's animal abuse to, feed lettuces to your dog. And, that's not what we're doing. Our products don't have any lettuce in them. But public receptivity can be iffy at times. So once I did some vox pops outside a Pets at Home in Brighton to chat to people about how they felt about plant-based dog food. And most people hadn't thought about it at all. They weren't necessarily against it. They weren't, they weren't aggressive, potentially because of the way the vox pops were done, but they hadn't really thought that it was possible. They didn't know it was possible. And so this is the key issue, is not so much that people disagree with it, is that they just don't know anything about it. There's so much mythology around dogs being obligate carnivores, which Andrew helpfully debunked at the beginning of his webinar presentation. But most people still buy into that, which is obviously problematic. Number two is messaging consistency. So a lot of people are very motivated, as in the poll earlier in this webinar, are very motivated by animal welfare, farmed animal welfare. And so they're obviously, you guys are on board with the idea of plant-based pet food to combat that. But most people aren't. Most people don't care, unfortunately, that much, or at least in our experience. And so how do you mix the messages of, well, it's great for farmed animals, but also good for your own pets, and it's good for the environment, and it's good for their health? There's a lot of different messages in there, and finding the right people to hit with the right message, that is a difficult task. Especially when we're looking into things like cultivated pet food this year. That is a whole other kettle of toefish entirely. And so what we do with our messages is a big old can of worms. And finally, economic competitiveness. Now, this isn't so much us being economically competitive or not competitive. This is just the problem of being a startup. Plant-based pet food is such a new industry that, for the most part, all of the businesses currently operating are basically startups or scale-ups. Like, there are no very, very well-established, or there's a couple, but there's very few very, very well-established plant-based dog food brands. And what that means is there's a lot of startup fees, a lot of costs of getting going. There's a lot of kind of trying one thing and then realizing something else might work. We're not like the really big players in the space. And so that in itself comes with difficulties. We've got to worry about, where is our next investment coming from? How are we growing this month? Is this month a good month or a bad month? And that in itself is a difficult thing, and probably does put off a lot of viable entrepreneurs from the space. And so this is just a part of being a startup, is we've got to change the world at the same time as creating a viable business. And that is understandably difficult. That was my very brief thing. I think I'm slightly run over. I've tried to do it as quickly as I can. Quickly, who's next? Well, you can see a cat here. This is what we've got our eyes set on, is ultimately cultivated meat, cat and dog food. And that is the dream. There are, something like 20, I think, million cats in the UK who don't have that many options in terms of what they can eat. And people are far more prejudiced against vegan cat food, despite what Andrew's just said, than they are against vegan dog food. And so if we can develop something that is a no slaughter, no kill method of feeding cats nutritionally complete diets, far more environmentally friendly, then I think we're onto a winner. So that's our dream as a company right now. Thank you very much. If you want to email me, in the bottom right, there's rory@omni.pet. And if you'd like to read our free 50-page ebook on how to transition your dog to plant-based, which is normally $9.99, just drop me an email, message me in the chat, do whatever, and I'll send a copy over to you. Thank you. And that is me. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Rory. Next, we have Billy Nicholles, political researcher at Bryant Research. Thank you, Billy.
Okay, thank you so much. I will assume that you guys can all see my slides okay. And I'll do my best to keep this under 10 minutes so that we have some time for questions at the end, which is, I know, really important. So thank you, Andrew, for your talk on the research on this. And thank you, Rory, for your talk on the practice of selling plant-based pet food, vegan pet food. I'm going to talk a bit about something that both of you guys have touched on, public perceptions of plant-based pet food. Obviously, something that's really important if we care about moving people towards nutritionally sound plant-based diets. So I'll be speaking on some research that we published at Bryant Research recently from a nationally representative UK survey on public perceptions of plant-based pet food. And this was part of an annual survey that we conduct at Bryant Research on a range of subjects relevant to the protein transition. Some of them are on the screen now. So if you're interested, do check out the Bryant Research website to see them. But briefly, in motivation of consumer research, why is consumer research important now? Well, I think Andrew has shown some really impressive and positive findings from his research and others on the health and environmental outcomes of vegan pet food. So now that we know that transitioning companion animals to vegan pet food is in most cases possible and indeed also really preferable to conventional meat-based pet food, now I think consumer research is really necessary, right? The weight of evidence supporting vegan pet food now means the question is turning from, is this possible? And Andrew spent a lot of time thinking about that, to now, will consumers transition, right? And also, how can we encourage them to transition as quickly, as effectively as possible? So that's the motivation behind this research. Briefly on the structure, I'll talk about the survey background. I'll run you through 3 main findings that we found, and then I'll end with a main recommendation as well. So let's have a look at the survey background. All relatively simple. This was a nationally representative survey of the UK population. We surveyed 1,000 people. Of those 1,000, 532 respondents were guardians, so guardians, pet owners, for at least one companion animal. So that's the end number we're talking about for these questions specifically. And we surveyed them on their current diet that they fed to their companion animal, their openness in general to feeding a plant-based diet, and also some reported barriers as well. And finally, on this last point, this is quite important. The guardians we surveyed were not exclusively dog and cat guardians. They were mostly, but not exclusively. That last point is just worth keeping in mind because it means the data is slightly skewed compared to other studies on this topic, because this obviously includes some animals who were herbivorous to start with, animals like rabbits and guinea pigs and so on. So when I'm talking about companion animals in this talk, I'm mostly referring to dog and cats, who make up 95% of pet food sales globally. But just to be aware, this is a slight point of difference between the survey data, which isn't exclusively dog and cat guardians. It is majority though, so I think this is still valuable information. So let's look at our first finding, which is openness. Andrew spoke a little bit about this. Our headline finding here, over a quarter, so 26% of guardians are open to feeding a plant-based diet. And on top of that, that's compared to 7.5% of guardians who are already doing so. That 7.5 probably slightly on the high end, right? Because remember, we're including some companion animals like rabbits and guinea pigs that are herbivorous to start with. That 26% figure, just to break it down, that's slightly lower than other studies. Andrew has done a couple where he found between 44 to 51%. I think you also mentioned 54 in a different study there, Andrew, of dog and cat guardians would realistically consider alternatives to meat-based pet food. And similarly, Sarah Dodd, a researcher that we heard about earlier, found that 35% of guardians who weren't feeding a plant-based diet were interested in doing so. So there's a little bit of variation there, but I think the main point is the same. And that is that a sizable segment of guardians are receptive to this idea of plant-based pet food. And the majority of these receptive guardians haven't yet started using it. So I think, really this is an opportunity for the vegan pet food sector and for advocates of vegan pet food. There's a substantial market open to transitioning companion animals onto vegan pet food. And I think we can assume that with the benefits that have recently been discovered, that market is probably going to increase. Which consumer groups are most receptive to change? Well, that's probably the subject of a lot of future research and something I'm certainly keen to do more work on. But this survey indicates that raw meat-based feeders, so that's guardians who are feeding raw meat to their pets, are slightly more open than average to feeding a plant-based diet. So this could be one promising consumer group that pet food companies might want to target. Okay, let's move on to the second finding, which is barriers. I think this one's really important, has some interesting findings. The main headline is, as Andrew said, health is number one. That's most people's main barrier still. But at the same time, many other barriers do also persist. So we asked respondents to rank their top 5 barriers to feeding their animal a plant-based diet, and the findings are in this table here. In the blue column we've got on the left-hand side, this is the percentage of respondents who ranked each barrier as their most concerning. So that adds to roughly 100%. And here, as we can see, it's clear that the primary barrier for guardians is health at 42%. And then we've also got some good. So this means that basically concerns about nutritional soundness and the health outcomes of plant-based diets. Then we've got some concerns about price, palatability, and the naturalness of these products as well. But I think what's really interesting is when we look at the yellow bar on the right-hand side, this yellow bar signifies the average ranked position of each barrier by all respondents, where a higher number indicates greater concern. So what are each of these barriers being ranked as an average? Here we see that health still comes out on top. We can see that, but crucially, there's less variation here. So most of the barriers are actually hovering more closely around the average ranking of 3 out of 5. I think that suggests that cumulatively, different guardians are still concerned with different aspects of plant-based pet food. And whilst we've still got health as the strongest barrier, we actually need to address multiple barriers in order to accelerate the transition to vegan pet food for different guardians. Just to get a little bit more detail on these barriers, I think this is pretty interesting, some qualitative findings that we found. So when prompted to raise any other concerns that guardians had, 121 out of the 532 we surveyed wrote in unique answers. That's pretty high. So I think that's signifies some pretty strong feelings about this within our survey pool. This word cloud gives an idea of the main themes in these responses. So in particular, we've got this idea of meat being a natural part of dog and cat diets. Natural, you can see on the screens the words like obligate and carnivore always there. Interestingly, carnivore was used for dogs and cats. There wasn't always a distinction there. And we also found that ideas of what these animals would eat in the wild were pretty important to some guardians as well. And lastly, we also saw some guardians saying that feeding vegan diets was essentially an enforcement of human values on animals, and that was seen as unethical. It was even described by some as abuse. So pretty extreme stuff there. I think we're seeing that meat is seen as, by many guardians, as an essential, as a natural, as a normal part of animal companion diets. I think this shows that the opposition we're seeing from guardians who are pretty opposed to vegan pet food is often quite instinctive, and it's often quite principled as well, right? It's based on ideas of right and wrong, of natural and unnatural, and of healthy and unhealthy. So I think that's pretty useful information to know who is opposed to this and why at the moment. And that brings me to the main recommendation that I think this research prompts. I think that's now that communication is really, really key. I think these findings show that many guardians are still concerned with plant-based pet food, and particularly when it comes to the health outcomes of these diets. But at the same time, as Andrew, kindly told us in quite a lot of detail, we have a really good, new and growing body of evidence showing that companion animals can thrive on a vegan diet. So I think now communicating this research has the potential to diminish many of these consumer barriers that we're seeing today, and particularly diminish the main barriers, the most important ones, which are, of course, the fears about health outcomes and the questions about the perceived naturalness of these products. So I think for anyone here who's working at organizations that are concerned with animal welfare and environmental sustainability, for those working in the food system, for those that have a dog or know people that have a dog, I think this is the chance for people to get really creative. I think it's important for organizations to engage with their audiences, set up website FAQs. I'm shouting out the Omni FAQ here, which has some really good frequently asked questions, and also a references tab at the bottom that has 72 references. So really, really impressive science-backed stuff that we've got here. I think organizations can promote this sort of research on their social media, platforms, and establish educational campaigns on this topic as well. I think all of that is really important to address these consumer barriers and concerns. So I'll end by saying I think the pet food transition, the pet food protein transition that we're talking about today is still in its infancy at the moment. And that means there's a lot of really exciting change to come ahead. But crucially, that's if we pay attention to these consumer attitudes towards vegan pet food and use this growing body of research that Andrew and others are so kindly conducting to address their concerns, to communicate the research to address their concerns, and accelerate the transition from meat-based to vegan pet food for all the reasons we've seen today, that is going to be a very beneficial thing for our society. Okay, I'll end there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rory, for your very insightful presentation. Now we can go ahead with the Q&A. We have some questions already. This question is from Julia. It'd be great to understand why the industry has not followed this science yet, and why traditional big brands and new big brands are not improving the recipes and launching more plant-based protein sources in pet food.
I think that's a sign to me, so I'll take that one. I kind of wish I knew, to be quite honest. It would be, yeah. So I think a lot of it is they are investing slowly. So big companies like Mars, for example, who are one of Europe's biggest, if not the biggest, pet food company, they are slowly investing in things like plant-based, insect-based, maybe cultivated meats. I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, these companies want to establish kind of a monopoly. So part of that is just kind of their own financial interest to keep a tab on things that are happening. But I think to a greater degree, they are driven by the age-old supply and demand complex. So demand is predominantly for conventional meat-based stuff. I think that's because there just hasn't been enough consumer education around plant-based or novel proteins or kind of more sustainable options. I think there's a lot of stigma around it, and I think that's largely the reason. I have to say I'm not optimistic enough to believe that a giant company like Mars, for example, are solely motivated by pet health. If they were, and they took on all of, say, Andrew Knight's studies to heart and changed everything they were doing, I think consumers would need to catch up first, so that supply can match with the demand. So that's a lot of the issues that we face. For example, is we're not just about producing pet food that the pets like and is healthy for them. We also need to convince the pet owners, and that's the really difficult thing. So it's slowly happening, but they're not only about pet health, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Rory. This question for Andrew. This is with regards to cats. Is arachidonic acid enough in vegan pet food, and which source of fat in its ingredient list can supply this? And also, Arabella asks, what about the urine pH? Is that a factor of concern if feeding cats vegan? Can you recommend a really good tested vegan cat food?
Okay. So with respect to arachidonic acid, I couldn't answer that question without doing further research. My area isn't the exact ingredients that are used in the various different brands and how that matches up with the nutritional requirements. I think what's important for people when choosing diets is that they choose diets which are labelled as being nutritionally complete and balanced, and that they're coming from reputable companies that can provide some information about steps taken to ensure nutritional soundness, rather than worrying too much about what the individual ingredients might be and how they're being meeting the specific nutritional requirements. The important thing is to make sure that nutritional requirements are being met overall, because of course, if people make their own diets at home or choose products from companies that aren't taking the right steps, then there's not a guarantee of nutritional soundness. Regarding where would I recommend a really good vegan cat food, I have on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, a list of suppliers. It's not up to date. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to do that, but it does provide a long list of suppliers in various regions of the world. So I would perhaps start there. And finally, regarding the urine pH, there historically was a concern that by feeding vegan diets, the acidity of the urine would become weaker. The urine would become more alkaline, and that would predispose to certain mineral crystals forming the urine, which could form tiny stones and block up the urinary tract. However, it's been found in the large-scale studies, the ones by the researchers at Guelph and the ones that we did, all of the studies of cats in this field, there's been no increase in the rates of urinary tract problems compared to cats fed meat. There's no statistically significant difference. So it appears that concern, based on reports from a tiny number of cases, did not hold as being a valid concern when we looked at populations involving more than 1,000 cats. So you don't need to worry about that anymore.
Thank you so much, Andrew. There is another question actually for you with regards to feeding plant-based food to cats. So, Andrew, could you maybe say a little bit about the potential obstacles concerning feeding cats a vegan diet? And could you provide practical advice on how to transition your cat to a vegan diet?
Yeah, so practical advice. I have some of this on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, in the summary article. But essentially, cats that have been maintained on a certain brand of meat-based pet food for many years can become very resistant to switching onto other diets. Sometimes they seem to become almost addicted to some of the additives, the flavorants, which are included. And this can include things like digest, which is partially dissolved entrails, usually the intestines, but also livers, lungs of chickens and other animals with certain enzymes added and other additives, and the whole process arrested partly through by phosphoric acid being added. So this is a sort of a soup of partially dissolved entrails, and it's added to brands of pet food in order to impart a specific flavour. Batches that are considered to taste a little bit more like fish might end up resulting in a can of assorted body parts being labelled as ocean whitefish, for example. So cats can become almost addicted to certain brands of meat-based pet food when they've been on them for a long period of time. Others can be very enthusiastic and happy to transition on day one. I recommend that even for enthusiastic animals, we try to transition gradually over a couple of weeks, because it provides time for the digestive enzymes and the bacteria within the gut to transition more gradually to the new diet, decreasing the chances of diarrhea or other adverse reactions. If you're having trouble convincing your cat that this strange new diet is in fact really good vegan pet food, then there are a number of things that you can do. You can try gently warming the food to increase the odors, bearing in mind the sense of smell is really important for cats and also dogs. Fresh food only, and various dietary additives such as small amount of vegetable oil, nutritional yeast flakes, spirulina, nori flakes. These are in the summary article on my website, sustainablepetfood.info.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And we have a participant who would like to speak. We have Jana. Can you hear me, Jana? I think you can, if you mute yourself, you can speak now if you have a question.
I've just now clicked allow to talk, so we should be able to hear you now, Jana, if you unmute. The hand's gone down. Maybe we're back to regular Q&A.
I think I see her question. If it was by Jana, yeah. Is there a list of vegan veterinarians around the world? Is the question.
I mean, on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, I have a page on vets where half a dozen of us are listed. Sometimes people do want to have a consultation with a vegan veterinarian, and it's helpful, obviously, to have one in the same geographic region. So that's the only place that I know of that has such a list. Rory mentioned that within his company Omni, there are a growing list of veterinarians just within the company that he said provide free consultations as well for presumably clients of Omni. So those are two sources that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Andrew. Rory, there's one for you. It's some tips. Maggie is saying that she lives in the Netherlands and would love to transition my cat to a vegan diet, but she cannot find any 100% plant-based options there. So do you have any tips?
I'm not sure I do. So I'm not a cat owner myself, unfortunately. I have a dog that's the size of a cat, but doesn't quite count. But I'm also not based in the Netherlands, so I haven't actually researched myself. I did have a quick Google when I saw the question, but I couldn't come up with anything more informative than that Maggie has surely already done herself. I don't know if Andrew said his website, Sustainable Pet Food, has a list of suppliers, so you probably would try there is the best bet. I don't want to speak to something I don't know about, so I'm afraid I can't be of too much help.
Thank you, Rory. And we have one more question. I think we can take one more question from Sarah. She hasn't assigned to anyone, so anybody who'd like to answer this, perhaps it's more for you, Andrew. Is there anything to think about when it comes to puppies and kittens, or can they just be put on a plant-based diet from the beginning?
It's certainly possible to feed them on nutritionally sound vegan diets from the beginning. Main issues with puppies and kittens is simply they're much smaller. The stomach capacity is much smaller. They can't store enough nutrition to get them through from breakfast all the way through to dinner. They need to be fed multiple times throughout the day in smaller amounts. They also have higher growth rates. So some companies, and Rory mentioned that this is the case for Omni, some companies produce special diets for puppies and kittens where the nutritional profile will be slightly different, for example, to take account for the higher growth rates. So yes, you can find such diets if you wish to. But important consideration would be simply changing the feeding regime as well, more often and smaller.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. Okay, so Elizabeth has a question with regards to outreach. Billy has already replied, so I'm just going to read out what she said. She said that she does outreach for plant-based dog food, and she said that in the outreach conversations, the interest from people is higher than the survey results suggest. And she says that they need unbranded downloadable PDF fact sheets and samples or sample vouchers from all the main brands of plant-based dog and cat food. So that's not directly a question, but I think it ties in with something I wanted to ask to all of you. How do we change consumers' opinion? How do we get information about plant-based pet food to reach kind of all the guardians, really, to give people the opportunity to make a choice, to make an informed choice? How can brand do that, perhaps? How can vets do that, perhaps?
There is a fact sheet which is unbranded, which is produced by UK Pet Food, which is the Pet Food Manufacturers Association in the United Kingdom. Has, I think, more than 100 manufacturers in it, nearly all of them in the industry. So they recently updated their fact sheet on vegetarian and vegan diets, pet diets, about a year ago. And it adopts a cautious tone, but it does support the use of vegan pet diets, providing they're formulated to be nutritionally sound, and makes the point that all the necessary nutrients can now be supplied from diets that are plant-based and supplemented appropriately. So that's unbranded, other than UK Pet Food, the Manufacturers Association being on it, and you can find that on their website. Obviously, my website, sustainablepetfood.info, it doesn't endorse any particular company or brand or product. I do have a list of suppliers from which people can seek to obtain these diets, and it's a long list. My material is obviously unbranded, but yes, it would be helpful, I think, if there were more fact sheets and resources such as that. I've certainly taken that comment on board. I'll bear that in mind for the future. I think one of the key points from Billy's presentation is the need for much greater focus on communication and outreach. And I very much agree. The evidence base is now there. It's now stronger than that which exists to support many other generally accepted diets or veterinary healthcare interventions. What is needed now is more research is helpful, but even more important is definitely the communications and the outreach. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you very much. Do we have time for one more question? So,
yeah, as long as there's appetite for it.
Great. Ariel, I see you have raised your hand. You can speak if you wish to speak. Looks like she's gone.
I think Elizabeth's question was the one that's just been covered.
I have just hit allowed to talk, so Elizabeth should be able to talk if you unmute, Elizabeth. I don't actually know if this works. It doesn't seem to. But perhaps that was your question we already covered in chat, or you can let us know if it wasn't, Elizabeth.
Okay, great.
Am I here? It
Oh
takes a
yes, we
while.
can hear
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Right. There is a huge army of vegan animal rights activists around the world in every country. I spend every single day talking to vegans and non-vegans who do not know about plant-based pet food. I am like literally the first person who is telling them about this. And it's very difficult to argue with vegans about vegan pet food. So some simple stuff to set them up so they know the key points and they can incorporate it into their outreach and they can give away samples, just little sachets, then it will take off like a rocket ship because people are already out there doing the outreach. The capacity is already there. They're underinformed. They need some activist training sessions like this, but for activists. And they can do it because this is the year of plant-based dog food. There's going to be a big article in the next issue of Vegan Food and Living magazine, which, you know, it's been difficult to get there, but we've got it. There's going to be an ad in there. I'm sponsoring it. And I would really, really, really like to have some expert backup to arm the activists with the information that they need, because I am just spinning my wheels trying to explain all of this that we're going through right now to activists in the comments on Instagram. It's just not efficient. And there's a whole world of new plant-based dogs and cats if we can arm them in an efficient manner to do this. So this is like really, really huge. I mean, I'm doing my best, but I can't do it alone. So I just need some backup. I understand that the experts are busy doing other things, talking to vets and, you know, doing research and everything, but it's ridiculous at the moment. And I understand that the pet food manufacturers don't want to get involved because they want to sell pet food. But the advocacy side of it is how the match is going to light the fire. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I love your energy, and I'm totally on board as well. Yeah, we're animal people, and yeah, we hear you on the urgency to make this happen. There's a few links that Andrew's been posting in the Q&A section here with different graphics that are hopefully kind of pitched towards advocates and activists. I'm sure that there is more room for materials on this as well. And as Elizabeth's saying, it's just giving very concisely the arguments that can be used in these kind of discussions. I think that's what a lot of Billy's work is highlighting as well, right? There's a really good basis of evidence now, so we're kind of selling ourselves short if we're not disseminating that as far and wide as we can. Yeah, I can see Rory with hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I completely sympathise and thank you, Elizabeth, for what you're doing. I used to work as a campaigner at a vegan charity, and when I came on board with Omni, one of the first things I did was I emailed round to all of the vegan charities in the UK where we're based, well, I'm based, to see if anybody wants to collaborate on a campaign around plant-based pet food, because everyone's campaigning on farming for human food. Everyone's campaigning for consumer education of humans about what they eat, and no one campaigns about what we feed to the animals in our houses. And even people who are working at vegan charities, who I know personally, don't know all that much about vegan food for dogs, for example. And so I've been really keen on this, and the responses I got were people who are very interested, but who just have plates so full. And so this isn't for grassroots activists, this was to actual organizations. They just didn't have any room in the calendar this year, particularly, to come up with anything. The door's always open if activists want to get in touch with me, for example, at Omni. And I'm really keen on seeing what we can do. But yeah, it's difficult because, as you say, companies have to make money and charities have to run the campaigns their donors want them to run. And so it falls basically onto grassroots activists like yourself to do the consumer education. But hopefully we can change that. So yeah, get in touch, as Billy said above, get in touch with him at Bryant and me as well, and we'll see what we can do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rory. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Billy. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. It is time to wrap up. I'm afraid we went over a little bit. So I would like to thank all of you again. The recording will be available after. And if there are any unanswered questions that we didn't have the time to answer today, we will email everybody with the answers after the webinar today. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Stef.
Thanks. Bye.